Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh. We're here on Yahweh's Sabbath day. Greetings to those on the internet. We hope you enjoy the messages that go out. Today's message is entitled The Body and the Bride. And there's a verse, I believe it's in Isaiah, it says that Yahweh declares the end from the beginning. And some might think that that means that He tells you future events, or He tells you things before they happen, and that is so. And some actually go back to the book of Genesis to find out deeper meanings of things that are going to happen in the future. And there's a lot of things. Some actually I've heard say that the entire Bible can be summed up in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. That you can extract allegorical significance out of the things of future events. And we'll touch on some of that today. And some actually mean that if you break down the language into the paleo pictograph alphabet, that stories are actually told in the words. That the gospel is actually encoded in the letters. But I'm not going to talk about that today, but I'm just sharing that, declaring the end from the beginning has a lot of depth to it. But today we actually read about the creation of Adam, the creation of the heavens and the earth, Adam and Eve. Adam was told to take dominion over everything. Adam was put in place as a ruler. He even named all of the animals. But I believe there's a deeper meaning to all that stuff. The Bible calls our Messiah the second Adam. And the same thing that Adam was told to do, our Messiah is going to do. He's going to take dominion and He's going to rule over everything. And there's even a verse that says that everything in heaven and on earth have been named by Him. Pretty significant about the naming thing. But we're going to go through some scriptures. This morning I looked up about 5 or 6 words and went through the Bible on these words. I looked up Adam. I looked up body. I looked up marriage, wedding, bride, and head, and pulled out some of these verses. And let's start off in Romans chapter 12. I got a lot of verses to cover, but what I'm trying to extract out of these scriptures is the Messiah is the head. He has a body. He has a bride, and we look forward to a wedding. And some believe that there will be wedding guests, and there will also be a bride. Some believe that the whole body is the bride. And I'm not here to determine that today. I'm just going to cover some scriptures and discuss those things, and you can draw your own conclusions from there. I'm not flipping, I'm talking. Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 3. For I say through the grace given unto me to every man that is among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly according as Elohim hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. For as we have many members in one body, and all members have not the same office, so we, being many, are one body in Messiah, and every one members one of another. Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of faith. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Starting in verse 4. Now there are diversities of gifts. And I want to point out one thing about the scriptures we just read. He said, don't think of yourself higher than you ought to, which the Greek word there means don't be arrogant. And then he says that we have gifts according to grace. So your position, your calling is by grace. And don't think of yourself higher than you ought to. And we have no reason to boast because He called us. He revealed Himself to us. He helped us to understand. And all you did was say, yes, sir. But He's performing the work. It's His action. It's His Spirit. And He's drawing all into Himself. But anyway, back here in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, starting in verse 4. Now there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are differences of administrations, but the same Master. And there are diversities of operations, but it is the same Elohim which works all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man to profit with all. For to one is given by the Spirit the word of wisdom, to another the word of knowledge by the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another the gifts of healings by the same Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another diverse kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But all these work that one and the self same Spirit, dividing to every man severally as He will. For as the body is one, and has many members, and all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is the Messiah. For by one Spirit are we all baptized into one body, whether we be Jews or Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, and have been all made to drink into one Spirit. Let me skip down to verse 24. For our comely parts have no need, but Elohim hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to the part which lacked, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it, or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now you are the body of Messiah, and members in particular. So several times in scriptures we see an illustration of the human body working together as one, and the Messiah is the head. Let's go over to Ephesians chapter 3. And what's interesting, if you really think about the depths of this illustration, all these body parts working together, well, the head is what controls the body. So the body needs to be obeying the head. And the body shouldn't be doing anything that the head doesn't tell it to do. In the same way, I am the vine, you are the branches. I am the head, you are the body. Without me, you can do nothing. And then you can just think about the organs and the blood flowing and all that, and the nerves, and actually being His mouth, being His hands, being His feet, taking His word. It's just amazing. But Ephesians chapter 3, starting in verse 1. For this cause I, Paul, the prisoner of Yeshua Messiah, for you Gentiles, if you have heard of the dispensation of the grace of Elohim which is given me to you, ward, how that by revelation He made known unto me the mystery, as I wrote afore in few words, whereby when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Messiah, which in other ages was not made known unto the sons of men, as it is now revealed unto His holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit, that the Gentiles, the nations, should be fellow heirs and of the same body, and partakers of his promise in Messiah by the good news, whereof I was made a minister according to the gift of the grace of Elohim. He was made a minister by the grace, and the mystery that was revealed was that the nations should come in and be part of the same body. It's a repetitious theme all throughout Scripture, bringing people, mankind into one, under one head, one shepherd, one king, one way of life, one Torah, one set of instructions. And there's a big confusion going on out there in the world. They think that this church was something new that the Messiah started. He started a new religion. He did away with the old bondage religion of the Jews. That is not what the Scriptures say. Let's take a look at verse 14 in the same chapter. For this cause I bow my knees unto the Father of our Master Yeshua Messiah, of whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named. When I read that, I was like, man. And I've heard it before, I've read it before, but it didn't really click until I read Adam naming all of the animals. And I just thought that was interesting, especially since he's called the second Adam, or the last Adam. In chapter 4, flip over one chapter, starting in verse 1. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Master, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body. Wow. That's not what we see out there in the religious circles today. We see thousands of different sects and divisions of the body that are not in one accord, do not agree with one another, and actually have anger and bitterness towards other people's views. And the scripture we read earlier said, let there be no schisms in the body. That's division. There is one body, one Spirit, even as you are called in one hope of your calling, one Master, one faith, one baptism, one El and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. But unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Messiah. Let me skip over to verse 11. And he gave some apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. Why? Now, he names all these people who have callings and responsibilities, and then he's about to tell us why he gave these positions of apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of the Messiah. So the reason he put apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers in place is so that the body would be equipped for ministry. And the edifying, the word edifying is to build up his body. Till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of Yahweh, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Messiah. That word stature means maturity. People are called to equip the church, his body, to be in the ministry, to edify the body, to bring all into unity unto maturity. Why? Next verse. that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. If we start back at that first verse, it is to prevent this last verse, to keep people from being led away by false doctrines and deceit and falsehood, to bring us into maturity, to understanding of what the Word is saying. And it's not that difficult. What makes it difficult is when Satan's doctrines come in and pervert the Scriptures and make the Scriptures contradict the Scriptures. And we know if we have a contradiction, we're missing something. In one second. Let's flip over to, let's continue on, sorry. But speaking of the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Messiah, trying to bring the body to maturity. 4:15, starting and coming back to 16, from whom, that's the head, from whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplies, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. This is all a body being fit together by joints and being put together underneath the head. And let's skip over to chapter 5, starting in, and I know I'm skipping over some verses, but that's just for the sake of time because I have a lot to cover, but you can go back and read the whole thing. Starting in verse 21. Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of Elohim. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the master. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Messiah is head of the assembly, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the assembly is subject unto Messiah, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Messiah also loved the assembly and gave himself for it. And that's pretty deep. You put a little salah after that. And this is definitely not authority for a man to be a slave driver over his wife. But anyway, husbands, love your wives, even as Messiah also loved the assembly and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious assembly, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the master the assembly. So if you want to know how you're supposed to love your wife, look at the relationship between the Messiah and his people. His love for them, the extent that he went to save her. Now this next verse is amazing. Let me see. Well, it's 30 and then the next verse. For we are members of his body and of his flesh and of his bones. We are the body of the Messiah. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Messiah and the assembly. Now, what he's saying here is verse 31 is a mystery about the Messiah. When I read that, For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. I thought he was explaining marriage, but he's not. He's explaining a mystery about the Son of Yahweh. The Son of Yahweh left his father and his mother, and he's cleaving to his wife, the church, the body. For this, that's why he said this is a great mystery. And I speak concerning the Messiah and the assembly. Now, let's go over here. So we've seen numerous scriptures about the body and the head and the wife. Let's go to Colossians chapter 1. And starting in verse 12 of chapter 1. Giving thanks unto the Father, which hath made us meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness, and hath translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son, in whom we have redemption through his blood, even the forgiveness of sins, who is the image of the invisible El, the firstborn of every creature. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the assembly, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence. For it pleased the Father that in him should all fullness dwell. We see that the Messiah, again, is the head of the body, which is the assembly. Chapter 2, let's look at verse 23 in that chapter. If you continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the good news which you have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, whereof I, Paul, am made a minister, who now rejoice in my sufferings for you, and fill up that which is behind of the afflictions of Messiah in my flesh for his body's sake, which is the assembly. He's saying he's going through this tribulation for the body of Messiah, and that body is the assembly. I know it's kind of repetitious, but we see this phrase of being his body all throughout Scripture, and I just wanted to put it all on the table there. Verse 25. Sorry, I had a little blank moment there. Whereof I am made a minister according to the dispensation of Elohim, which is given to me for you to fulfill the word of Elohim, even the mystery which hath been hid from ages and from generations, but now is made manifest to his saints, to whom Yahweh would make known what is the riches of the glory of his mystery amongst the Gentiles, which is Messiah in you. Now we learned another, previously, a mystery that the Gentiles would be partakers in one body. And here he says that the mystery is the Messiah in you. The Messiah in you, the hope of glory. Chapter 2 and verse 16, which we cover this frequently for clarification of these scriptures. So I'll just briefly touch on it. In verse 16 it says, "Let no man therefore judge you." And then in the last part of 17 it says, "But the body of Messiah." And here we see that we're supposed to judge things inside the body. And in Corinthians it says, "Let Yahweh judge those that are without." Now let's go over here to Luke chapter 3. And the genealogy is covered here, and it backs it up all the way to Adam. And I'm just going to read the last verse in chapter 3. It says, he's going reverse in the genealogy, and it says, which was the son of Enos, which was the son of Seth, which was the son of Adam, which was the son of Elohim. Adam is called the son of Elohim. In Romans chapter 5, he gives us a comparison of Adam and the Messiah. And this comparison picks back up in Corinthians. We'll touch on that in just a minute. Romans chapter 5, starting in verse 12. Wherefore, as by one man entered into the world, and death by sin. By one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed where there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. As soon as he said that, your mind should go meditate on Adam and look at the similitude, look at the significance, look at the depths of his life, what he was called to do, and you'll find a pattern. You'll find an allegorical meaning of Adam, who was a figure of him that was to come, but not as the offense, so also is the free gift. For if through the offense of one many be dead, much more the grace of Elohim and the gift by grace, which is by one man, Yeshua Messiah, hath abounded unto many. So what he's saying here is, actually, I'm going to let him explain it himself. And not as it was by one that sinned, so is the gift. For the judgment was by one to condemnation, but the free gift is of many offenses unto justification. For if by one man's offense death reigned by one, much more they which receive abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness shall reign in life by one Yeshua Messiah. Therefore, as by the offense of one judgment came upon all men to condemnation, it was through one man that condemnation came upon all men. Even so, by the righteousness of one, the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous. So he's putting Adam and the Messiah side by side in these verses. And he's saying Adam sinned and death came in condemnation to everybody in his path. But the Messiah was obedience, and it's a free gift, and righteousness can come upon all that's in his path. The second Adam, the last Adam, is reversing the curse by his obedience. Continuing on to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he puts Adam and the Messiah side by side again. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting in verse 21. And he's repeating the same theme. For since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Messiah shall all be made alive. But every man in his own order. Messiah, the first fruits. Afterward, they that are Messiahs at his coming. Let's skip down to verse 45. And so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Howbeit, that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural, and afterward that which is spiritual. The first man is of the earth, earthly. The second man is the master from heaven. As is the earthly, such are they also that are earthly. And as is the heavenly, such are they that are also that are heavenly. And as we have borne the image of the earthly, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. Everything he's saying here is side by side. We inherited a condemnation and an image of Adam. But now it's time to inherit the image of Messiah. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of Yahweh, neither doth corruption inherit incorruption. What's he saying here? We have to put off that old man, that flesh, and we have to receive his image. And that's what's going to happen. Not only can we receive his character, his nature, his love, his attributes now, but we're also going to inherit this. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. And the last time I spoke, I said right now we're actually rehearsing that, because we're trying to put on that old corruption, that old nature, that old rebellion. We're trying to put it off now, but we look forward to permanently putting it off. No more death, no more sickness, no more sin, no more rebellion. And the rebellion and the sin is what brought all that on anyway. Sin and death, corruption, decay. And Romans 8 says that the creation itself is in pains waiting to be delivered and the sons to be manifested. Why? Because man is destroying this earth in every aspect, any way it can, whether it be religion, medical, agriculture, education. It's all corrupt. And if you want to learn the truth, don't go to the professionals, because they'll lead you astray. And let's go back to Genesis, which is what we read today, and it's kind of the inspiration of all this. Genesis chapter 2. And starting in verse 18. And Yahweh said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a help meet for him. And out of the ground Yahweh Elohim formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, to the fowl of the air, to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a help meet for him. And Yahweh Elohim caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which Yahweh Elohim had taken from the man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. And I always joke about that. I can imagine Adam, when he saw his wife for the first time, he said, whoa, man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Now, there's something interesting here that, a lot of people see that there is actually a separate group of individuals in the body that are actually going to be the bride. And I'm not sure. It's good to study, and, I'll just be thankful to be in the kingdom, by golly. But what's interesting here is that a rib is taken out of the body to become his bride. Now, if you think about that, we've been reading all these scriptures about his body, his congregation, his people, the called out ones. But Paul has told us that there is depth in the story of Adam. So what if, just theoretical, I can't prove it, what if he is taking a rib, a portion, a part out of his body to become the bride? And there's going to be guests at the wedding. It's possible. I'm not going to say which way it is, but something to dig into, something to meditate on. Let's go over here to John chapter 3. And we'll be closing out here in just a few minutes. John chapter 3. And verse, let me don't say it yet. Starting verse 27. John answered and said, a man can receive nothing except it be given him from heaven. Another reason not to boast. You yourselves bear me witness that I said I am not the Messiah, but that I am sent before him. He that hath the bride is the bridegroom. But the friend of the bridegroom, which stands and hears him, rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. This my joy therefore is fulfilled. In Matthew chapter 22, and this is, I just pulled out some scriptures about the bride and the wedding and the marriage. In Matthew 22, starting in verse 2. The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a certain king which made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come. And as we read this, think about all the history that's gone in scriptures. Yahweh making a marriage for his son, sending out his servants, the prophets, and some didn't want to come. And he sent forth other servants, saying, tell them which are bidden, behold, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready, come unto the marriage. But they made light of it, and went their ways, one to his farm, another to his merchandise, and the remnant took his servants, and entreated them spitefully, and slew them. How many of the prophets have been killed for the message of the king? But when the king heard thereof, he was wroth, and he sent forth his armies and destroyed those murderers and burned up their city. Does that ring a bell? Destruction of the city and of the temple. Then said he to his servants, the wedding is ready, but they which were bidden were not worthy. Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as you shall find, bid to the marriage. Go out and invite everybody. So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all as many as they found, both bad and good. He called the bad and the good. I have not come for the righteous, but for sinners unto repentance. And the wedding was furnished with guests. And when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. So some people came in that weren't dressed appropriately. That reminds me, there's a verse that says we have put on Messiah. That word put on means to be clothed with. Revelations talks about those that have washed their robes in the blood of the Messiah. There's another verse says that their robes are the righteousness of the saints. That word righteousness in the Greek actually means righteous actions, deeds. The white robes are the actions of the saints. And John says, he that is righteous does righteousness. And he saith unto him, friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then said the king to the servants, bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. I heard a brother, matter of fact, brother here said one time that those that are called are those that have the invitation. And those that are chosen are those that obey the invitation. Let's go down to, chapter 25. There's a lot of people that have this invitation. Billions of people have this invitation. Most of them don't read it. Even more don't understand it, and very few obey it. Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 10. And while they went to buy, a little background here. This is the foolish virgins and the wise virgins. And for the sake of time, we'll start off in verse 10. And while they went to buy oil because they didn't bring none, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Afterward came also the other virgins, saying, Master, Master, open to us. But he answered and said, Verily I say unto you, I know you not. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man comes. How can you prepare for the groom? Be ready and be clothed in that wedding garment. Let's go to Luke chapter 12. Just a couple more verses here. A few more verses. Luke chapter 12. Starting in verse 34. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Let your loins be girded about, and your lights burning. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. What is that light? Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. You are the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. You do not hide a light, but you let all see it. But then he goes on to say, I did not come to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Anyway, go back there and meditate on that. He talks about you being the salt, you being the light. I didn't come to destroy the law and the prophets. If anyone breaks the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same, they should be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Then he says, let your light shine so that they may see your good works. The law and the prophets are the light. They are the salt. Anyway, let your lights be burning. And you yourselves like unto men that wait for their master, when he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, they may open unto him immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the master, when he comes, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve him. Now, I hadn't touched on this yet, but we're going to see this in a few verses. He's talking about come to the supper, come to eat. There's a feast waiting. And I think there might be a connection on a few of these verses that we're going to read. Let's continue on here in verse 38. And if he shall come in the second watch, or come in the third watch, and find them so, blessed are those servants. And this know, that if the good man of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched, and not have suffered his house to be broken into. Be ye therefore ready also, for the Son of Man comes at an hour when you think not. Chapter 14, starting in verse 8. Now, at first I didn't think that this related, but I went back and read it again, and I thought it did have some significance. Verse 7, and he put forth a parable to those which were bidden, when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them, when thou art bidden of any man to a wedding. Now, remember, this is a parable. When you're bidden to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee, and he that bade thee, and him come and say to thee, give this man place, and thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, that when he that bade thee comes, he may say unto thee, friend, go up hither, then thou shalt have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. Now we see, talk about being invited to a wedding, sitting down and eating, and living in humility. Don't think of yourself higher than you ought to. And also being a servant. And whosoever exalts himself shall be abased, and he that humbles himself shall be exalted. And this is also the character of those that are bidden to the marriage. Then said he also to him that bade him, when thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends. Now we're seeing a different side of the wedding. Now he's showing us of the person that's doing the calling and who is being called. Then said he also to him that bade him, when thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, neither thy kinsmen, neither thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee. But when thou makest a feast, call the poor, and the maimed, and the lame, and the blind, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee. For thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. And that takes my mind over to Corinthians, where he said, look who's being called. Not many princes, not many rich. It's the poor things, the weak things, the humble things that are being called. In Revelations chapter 19, verse 7. Let us be glad and rejoice and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready. And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. That's that verse I was talking about. If you look up that word, it'll actually say righteous deeds. And he saith unto me, right, blessed are they which are called unto the marriage supper. So, this is where some people see a distinction. Some people are called to the supper, and some are actually called to be the bride. And some think it's all one and the same. I'm not going to make that decision, but you can reason that. And I'm just going to make a couple. Let me look at chapter 22 in Revelations. I got just a couple more verses. I don't want to drag this out too far. Chapter 22, starting in verse 12. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according as his works shall be. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Blessed are they that do his commandments, not those old bondage commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city. And if we go back and read what the gates of the city, it says that the gates of the city are named after the 12 tribes of the house of Israel. For without are dogs and sorcerers and whoremongers and murderers and idolaters and whatsoever loveth and maketh a lie. I, Yeshua, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the assemblies. I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright and morning star. And the Spirit and the bride say, come. And let him that hears say, come. That's the message of the bride. Come on. And let him that athirst come. And whosoever will, let him take the water of life. And I wrote this down. If we go back and read Revelations chapter 18, I'll touch on it quickly. And again, I'm trying not to drag this out. There's a lot of information. But I thought this was pretty significant. It's talking about the fall of Babylon. And it says, and I read through about the fall of Babylon. Let me... I didn't write it down. Yeah, right here. in verse 23. And I just thought this was interesting, and it doesn't seem like it has a depth, or there might not be a connection, but I think there might be. It's talking about this fall and come out of Babylon, my people. Do not partake of her sins and receive not of her plagues. And then read verse 23. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. Think about this now. Think about this. The fall of Babylon, he says that there's not going to be a candle anymore. Revelation starts off talking about candles. And the candles had something to do with his church, his assembly. But he's saying that the voice of the bride and the bridegroom aren't going to be in you any longer. Well, if we go back, and people have different understandings of what Babylon is, and I'm not going to talk about that today either, but whatever it is going to be a time when the light will be completely removed. You won't hear the voice of the bride or the bridegroom anymore. Just pointing that out. Go back and meditate on that. I'm going to close out Matthew chapter 8. Got two more. Almost done. I know. Y'all wake up. Wake up. Somebody's back there sleeping. No, I'm just kidding. Matthew chapter 8. Remember we were talking about eating at the feast. Being called to the wedding supper. Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 10. When Yeshua heard it, he marveled and said to them that followed, Verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And I say unto you, that many shall come from the east and the west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Flip over to Luke chapter 22, and this is where we're going to close out. And what I'm trying to bring into connection here is this eating, the feast, eating in the kingdom, eating the supper, the marriage supper. Luke 22, starting in verse 15. And he said unto them, with desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say unto you, I will not any more eat thereof, until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of Yahweh. He would not eat of the Passover until the Passover was fulfilled in the kingdom of Yahweh. And he goes on to do the significance of the bread and the wine. He did not establish communion at this point. He was saying, when you keep this feast, do it in remembrance of me. And then starting in verse 29, and I appoint unto you a kingdom, as my Father hath appointed unto me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So today we have seen that the Messiah is the head. He has a body, he has a bride, and he's coming to feast with us. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.